Have you ever noticed how often people comment on what others are eating?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like every time you go out to dinner with friends or family, someone's got to make a remark about the food, like, oh, I could never eat that much, or are you really going to finish all of that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's like people can't help but chime in on other people's plates.
Right. And always seems harmless enough, but we're actually diving into that today.
Interesting.
We've got some tips from therapists who specialize in eating disorders, and they have some really insightful advice on things you should avoid saying when you're dining with other people.
I'm all ears.
Because it turns out those seemingly innocent comments about food choices and portion sizes, they can actually have a pretty big impact.
Yeah. I think it's easy to forget how much diet culture is ingrained in our society. Like, we're constantly bombarded with messages about what we should and shouldn't eat, how much we should weigh, and what our bodies should look like.
True.
And it's so normalized to comment on those things, you know, to make judgments about other people's food choices or to compliment someone on their weight loss.
Yeah.
But what we often don't realize is that those comments can actually be really harmful.
Exactly.
Especially for people who might be struggling with disordered eating or body image issues.
Okay, so let's break this down. One of the most common phrases I hear, and honestly, I probably even said it myself a few times,
Yeah.
is I would never eat that. Why is that such a big deal? It just seems like a personal preference, right?
I mean, on the surface, it might seem harmless, but what it does is it reinforces this idea that certain foods are inherently good or bad. And when you say to someone, I would never eat that, it kind of implies that they're making a wrong choice. You know, like they're doing something unhealthy or maybe even morally questionable by eating that food.
I see what I mean.
And I think it's important to remember that food is so much more than just fuel. It's connected to our culture, our memories, our emotions. It's a way to connect with others and to experience pleasure.
Totally.
And when someone dismisses a food that you enjoy, it can feel like they're dismissing a part of you too.
Right. It's like saying, I would never listen to that kind of music, or I would never wear that outfit.
Exactly.
It's personal.
Yeah.
So this brings me to another one that I think a lot of us have probably heard or maybe even said. You're not going to eat all of that, are you? Now, sometimes it feels like a genuine question, especially if someone orders like a mountain of food. But is it really that problematic?
I think even with good intentions, that question can put someone on the spot and make them feel self-conscious about how much they're eating.
Yeah.
Like, it shifts the focus from enjoying the meal to analyzing and scrutinizing portion sizes.
And judging.
And judging, exactly. And for someone with a history of disordered eating, that can be incredibly triggering. You know, it can bring up feelings of guilt or shame around their food intake.
So it's not just about what we say about other people's food, but also about how we talk about our own food, right?
Yeah.
Like the therapists we looked at also point out that even commenting on our own food can have a negative impact.
Oh, for sure.
Like saying things like, oh, I ate way too much, or oh, I shouldn't have had that dessert. Does that really matter?
You know, we might think we're just expressing our own feelings, but it actually contributes to this overall negative and judgmental environment around food.
Okay.
Like, it reinforces this whole good food, bad food mentality.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
And it can make other people feel pressured to engage in that same kind of self-criticism.
Speaking of the good and bad food labels, one of the therapists really emphasized this concept of all foods fit.
Yeah.
What's the thinking behind that?
All foods fit is this really core principle in intuitive eating and just developing a healthy relationship with food in general.
Okay.
And it's basically about rejecting that restrictive mindset of diet culture and recognizing that all foods can have a place in a balanced and enjoyable way of eating.
So instead of labeling foods as good or bad, it's more about listening to our bodies and honoring our cravings.
Exactly. And, you know, giving yourself permission to enjoy all kinds of foods without guilt or shame.
You know, it's funny because reading that reminded me of this time I was at a work lunch and I ordered a pasta dish. And a colleague made this comment like, oh, I'm being good today and just having a salad. And it made me feel so self-conscious about my choice. Like I was somehow being bad for ordering pasta.
Oh, I totally get that. It's like these seemingly small comments can really affect us.
Yeah.
Or they reinforce that idea that food is about morality and willpower instead of nourishment and enjoyment.
Exactly.
Which it shouldn't be.
So what about comments that are often intended as compliments? Like, are you dying, or you look so healthy? Are those off limits too?
Yes, they can be just as problematic because commenting on someone's weight or appearance, even indirectly, can be really sensitive. And, it shifts the conversation towards their physical appearance rather than who they are as a person.
Right.
And while you look healthy might seem positive on the surface, it can be interpreted as implying that they've lost weight, which can be triggering for people who are struggling with their body image.
That makes sense. Okay, so this next one really surprised me. What about just saying, that looks good? Like, isn't that just a nice thing to say about someone's food?
In most cases, it probably is. But for someone who's really sensitive about their food choices, especially if they're recovering from an eating disorder, that kind of comment, even though it's well-intentioned, can draw unwanted attention to their plate.
I hadn't thought of that.
And, they might be working really hard to focus on their own internal cues and not on what other people are thinking about their food.
That's a good point. So it seems like the overall theme here is really just about respecting boundaries and being mindful of how our words can impact other people.
Absolutely.
Even if we don't intend any harm, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's not about policing every single word that comes out of our mouth,
right,
but it's more about shifting our focus from judgment to connection.
That's a great way to put it. So when we're gathering for a meal, what are some things we can focus on instead of scrutinizing food choices?
Well, we can focus on the company, the shared experience, the conversation, the things that truly nourish us beyond just the food itself.
I love that. All right, so to wrap things up, I have a little challenge for our listeners.
Okay.
Next time you're dining with others, try steering the conversation away from food and towards something a little more meaningful,
Like what?
Share a funny story, ask people about their day, maybe talk about a book you're reading or a movie you saw, or just genuinely enjoy being in their company without making it about the food on your plates.
Yeah, I like that.
It's food for thought, right?
Definitely.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.